And that just started. And I also want to let everybody know that we have microphones and video locked so that we don't have any background noise. And if I look distracted, it's because I'm letting some people in. I have to admit some people by hand, and so that's what I'm going to be doing. My name is Michelle Butler. Hopefully you're here to listen to a presentation about parenting a child with attention challenges, discovering strategies to support children with executive function, otherwise known as EF, difficulties, which includes attention. I am a speech language pathologist. I'm also a mom of 3 children, 19, 17, and 12. My 17-year-old has, I would say, fairly significant attention challenges, and my 12-year-old has dyslexia, and so they bring a lot of interesting things to our lives. And my 19-year-old is off at college and is working on her executive function skills even without any diagnosed difficulties. I think when she experiences stress, she has some executive function challenges herself. So I'm going to let Susan introduce herself.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everybody. My name is Susan Hepburn, and I'm a child clinical psychologist. I've been working with Littleton for almost 20 years now. I come in about once a month and do some consultation with different school teams. And then a couple of times a year, I have the opportunity to talk with parents in workshops like this. This is one that Michelle really took the lead on developing a couple of years ago and has since made some very nice additions to. So I'm quite excited to talk with you tonight about some strategies that we hope will be really practical for you as you support your children with EF challenges. And just to jump off of what Michelle is talking about, I'm now at Colorado State teaching, and executive function issues are a pretty common challenge for just about all of our college students, trying to figure out how to plan and monitor and focus the right amount of attention on the tasks. It appears to be a lifelong thing that we're always dealing with. So we see it in the students, which we'll talk about today, and you may find that some of what we talk about you could translate to adult life as well.
Okay, and the chat is available, so if you have questions along the way, feel free to put them in there. We'll try to address those when we finish all of the slides. So just know that we're going to leave room for questions at the end. So I think let's try to, Susan, maybe wrap up around, I was going to say 8:30, but that's 7:30 your time, right? Okay. Okay, so our hopefully what we will do today is do a good job of explaining what executive function is and what it has to do with difficulties related to attention. And then also, and probably the biggest part of why we are here is to help you learn how to support your children with executive function challenges or attentional difficulties. Okay. So first, I have been learning a lot about the neurodiversity movement, and a lot of people who have neurodiverse brains, which essentially means that your brain is differently wired, is to focus on strengths. So I felt remiss if I didn't put this in there, because we're going to be talking about all the challenges that our children have. But I want to make sure we also focus on strengths, because as a lot of us have children who are super challenging to parent, we have to also think about their strengths, because they hear so much negative feedback, that these are the things that I have learned as a parent, but also as a professional, that are really important. So what does your child like to do? and what do they get lost in doing. So making sure we're focusing on what their interests are is really, really valid and important to consider. Then, what are they good at? So sometimes what they're good at is not always what they like. So recognizing that that can be different and that can create its own challenges is important. And so when you're looking at what they're good at, what are their natural talents? And is there an overlap? Do they have things that they're good at that are also natural talents? And if so, what can you do to capitalize on those as a parent? And then I put a resource in here called, it's the VIA Character Survey. Sorry, I'm trying to move my controls. Give me just a second. And I think it's about a 10-minute survey, and you can do it from ages 7 through adulthood, and it will tell you signature strengths. And it's really pretty cool to think about all of the skills as strengths, but some of them are more natural talents than things that they have to work at. And so we want to find things that are essential to your child as a person, what is effortless for them, and what is energizing. So if your kids are younger, you can do it with them. It's also fun to take as a parent and kind of look to see if there is an overlap between your signature strengths and your children's signature strengths and your spouse or your partner, to see if there are overlaps, and if there's not an overlap, where do those fall? It's kind of a fun thing to do, and it's free. So there you can get more, of course, if you pay for more, but it's 24 signature strengths, I think, that they look at. So it's a pretty fun thing to do. Along those lines, I asked my 17-year-old, who is an ADHDer, and I said, what should I tell these parents tonight? And these are the things he told me. He said, tell them to treat their child as unique, not normal, because their brain is not normal, it's exceptional. And he wants you to know that you will have to help them along the way, and you'll have to do it in weird ways. So thinking outside the box is really important. That's my word, not his. And the other thing he said is it's helpful when parents talk to the teachers about what your child is good at and what your child is not good at, and that just because they're impulsive doesn't mean that it's intentional. So those are words of wisdom from a 17-year-old. Okay, moving along. All right, Susan, I'll let you take it over.
All right. Thank you very much. Good to hear those words of wisdom from a 17-year-old, I think. I think one of the bottom lines from this talk is that for anybody, whether we're talking about an elementary age student or someone in middle school, high school, or an adult, understanding your own attentional style or how your executive functions operate is really an important part of finding the right supports. So we want to spend a couple of minutes at the start here talking about what executive functions are and how to think about a couple of different models that have been broken down to define them. And then we hope to spend the majority of our time talking about those tools to try to help. So one of the metaphors that I really like is thinking about your executive functions as your air traffic control system. It's kind of the part of your brain and nervous system that does all of the coordination and tries to figure out what should we be paying attention to now and what should we act on, what should we hold back an impulse on. So another metaphor is to think of it as like a conductor of an orchestra. It's basically a set of pretty complex neurological functions that live in the frontal parts of your brain and are connected to all the other parts of your brain in order to sort of coordinate this entire nervous system. So they are like the air traffic control of your brain. Another way to think about it is that there are a set of skills that you may hear the term soft skills. What that means is these are skills that are required for a lot of tasks, but sometimes we don't teach them overtly, like you might teach someone how to brush their teeth. Sometimes we think of these soft skills that maybe they'll come along with experience and practice. And now we're realizing that we need to actively teach these attentional skills, such as how do you persist when you're working on a task and suddenly you've hit an obstacle and you're not sure what to do. We can teach kids strategies for that. How do you make a transition? Maybe you're really enjoying a certain kind of homework, but now you have to stop that and move to a less preferred project. These are things that kids, especially when they're younger, may need us to help support them how to do it. So these soft skills are pretty universal when it comes to being able to be successful in school environments, as well as being safe out there in the community. And they're also important for your job down the line. Now, different groups of scientists have different models and definitions about executive functions, and several researchers have broken it down into multiple parts where they will assess certain aspects of how a person attends, maybe do an intervention, and then find out if it has improved that ability. So one of the models that you might want to think about breaks executive function skills into 3 different kind of subcategories. There are those executive functions that help us with inhibition, which basically means learning to stop and think, to pause when you might be likely to behave impulsively or to behave without thinking. So for kids who tend to act on an impulse, there are a set of strategies that one can adopt to help them trigger for themselves, oh, I should stop and think about this before I act. Second area is that of working memory. This has to do with how much information a person's brain naturally stores with relatively little effort. And we need this amount of information in this temporary storage in order to act out our tasks. So working memory is something that allows you to note, if you put your keys down, that you've put them on the table. And then if you go to complete a task, you hopefully have held that information long enough that when your task is done, you're picking up those keys again. Working memory is often a set of attention skills that students really need to work on, because once you start working on a project, you might have to hold something in mind while you get more information or get another tool. And for some young learners, that capacity to hold information is really, really small, especially in the early years. It gets larger as we mature. But if a person has a hard time holding information, then they may need us to put some more visual cues around their environment so that the burden is not just on their own recall. And then the third area in this model is referred to as cognitive flexibility. So this really refers to the executive functions that help us adapt, help us go with the flow. If we have a change, it's everything from moving from one activity to another to being able to accept a new definition of a word that maybe you didn't think about it that way. So if you are parenting a child who can get stuck in thinking about something a certain way, or has rules that they impose on a lot of things without being flexible, that would be an example that falls in cognitive flexibility. And people who have a difficult time being flexible often have trouble shifting or changing the focus of their attention, which is a really important thing to be able to do, both in school and in life. Now, I think as Michelle mentioned, we're recording this presentation and the slides themselves can be available to those of you who would like to see it, because what we have here are a set of definitions of different domains of executive function that we often consider when we're learning about a student that we're working with in the schools. So there are various subdomains, you might say, which are listed here on this slide that would fall under those 3 categories that we just mentioned. Now, interestingly, there are students who may have challenges in 1 or 2 of these areas, but do pretty well in the others. In my experience clinically, if a student tends to have some executive function issues, we tend to see a pattern where about half or more of them are areas of challenge. And so understanding an individual's profile, which aspects of executive function are developing well and don't need any supports, and which ones require support is an important part of the process. So for those of you that have a son or daughter who has a 504 or an IEP, in other words, has specialized instruction, you may have participated in some assessment of your child's executive functions. And that was done so that the school team could figure out how best to support your child's style. A lot of what you're going to hear Michelle and I talk about has to do with the idea that we are all born into the world with a nervous system that is tuned up in a very specific way for that individual. It's probably affected by genetics and the environment, is what scientists think. One of the aspects of neurological functioning in any human being that is most vulnerable to stress is executive functions. So you can be born with a biologically totally healthy brain and under stress have a hard time remembering things, have a hard time taking a different viewpoint, have a hard time controlling emotions. To make it even more complex, many individuals with specific conditions like attention deficit disorder, autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, thank you, Michelle, or some of these things that you see here are at additional risk for having executive function problems. In fact, for many of these conditions, it can be kind of the core part of what can make it challenging for a student to access the general education curriculum, and a big part of where we bring in some supports and accommodations. So while our executive function challenges are kind of biologically based and individualized because of our experience, they are also really responsive to intervention. So it's the kind of thing that as parents and teachers, we need to be patient and persistent and kind of maintain our own healthy executive function, because it often requires a lot of repetition to teach these things. But what Michelle will be sharing with you a little bit later is just a whole set of strategies that have been demonstrated in the research to be quite helpful. So two things are happening in our favor. As kids mature and have more experiences, they tend to naturally improve in these areas. And when we add these supports and accommodations and really understand a student's profile, then we can really support them to do the best they can in these different settings. So executive function skills allow us to figure out what we need to do and then execute that task. So if you are a person who keeps a to-do list, you've already created a set of strategies and supports for your own executive functioning. They also allow us to think about possible obstacles that we might see in the future and then be able to plan for those. So the idea that you can anticipate and plan is an important skill, especially for middle and high schoolers. And as students are working on longer and more complex assignments, executive function skills also allow you to keep your attention on a larger project, always thinking about what it is you're trying to end up with, so that you have the destination in mind while you're on the journey. And for many of the students that we work with, we need to teach them how to engage in this planning process. When a person's executive function skills aren't operating well, you can see the kind of impulsive decision-making that our cartoon friend here is engaged with. My thought about this, I sort of over-identify with this character. If you're really into what you're doing, you may not think about the consequences of your actions quite as much. So there are learners who can have excellent focus when they're motivated, but they don't necessarily see all the other parts, relevant information around their focus that they ought to be taking in. So part of good EF is also knowing how to regulate that focus, that sometimes being overly focused on one outcome, like this man might be as he's working on cutting off this tree, could lead to an unsafe situation because he's not thinking about what might happen next. And we also see that many students need help learning how to watch their own behavior, watch their own performance or learning, and then recognize when they need to do something to help themselves. So we refer to this as self-monitoring, but it's something that some people will do naturally. Others need to be taught. So for example, if you have a son or a daughter who will just do a worksheet really quickly and doesn't check their work or go back and try to fix mistakes, that's an example of a self-monitoring activity that they may be practicing within the school setting. And just a little aside, this Far Side cartoon was given to me by my advisor in grad school when I handed in the first draft of my thesis, which she did not like. And I could tell that from this relatively unplanned web. So it's funny to me now, it wasn't at the time. Next slide, please. So let's look a little bit more then at these executive function skills that are very closely tied to attention, and then I will turn it over to Michelle. So we've talked a bit about planning and self-monitoring. Let's look at attention more specifically in just a few slides here. So I like to think about attention problems in 3 different ways. And I know it's going to sound a little bit overly simplistic. People have made their whole careers, focused on understanding the different ways that the human attentional system can work. But the way that I have thought about what I've been reading about attention is that some people have difficulties shifting attention, some have problems focusing, and some have problems maintaining. So let's talk about each one just for a second, because for many learners, one of these attention problems might be more primary, more relevant for them than the others. For other learners, it's kind of a mix, and they kind of interact with each other to cause challenge for a student. So a person could have problems, I'm sorry, just back to the other one. Person could have problems shifting attention if they have a hard time moving from one task to another, or from what they want to see happen to what you want to happen, or from their own thoughts to reality. Thank you, Michelle. Next one. Or a child could have problems sustaining attention. In other words, being able to maintain focus on a task, especially a less preferred task, for long enough for it to be effective. So kids who start a task, give up easily, and walk away may be children who need some help sustaining their attention. Many times we would describe a child like this as easily distractible, and we are often following them to try to rein in their attention. And we want to try to teach them to do that for themselves over the long run. And then the third aspect has to do with what you're attending to. So that phrase about missing the forest for the trees is quite relevant for learners, in particular with autism spectrum disorders, where they tend to get overly focused on details and have a hard time seeing how all of those details come together to form a meaningful big picture. And if you get lost in details, you might miss what the real point of the assignment might be, and you might go down a rabbit hole and use all of your cognitive resources to work on something that isn't as relevant as what the teacher was trying to do. Next slide, please. So if we want to help children learn how to shift attention, here are a couple of quick strategies. First, we know that a clear, really simple verbal direction, or even nonverbal, of what you want them to attend to. So you might say, in 2 minutes, we're going to be done with this, and we're going to do this. And perhaps you'll have a visual to show them that. But the idea is that you're going to give them a very clear cue that in a couple of minutes, you're going to stop working on this, you're going to put that away, and now you're going to do this. And I'm kind of using this as if the child is moving from one homework assignment to another. Where it often happens, in my experience anyway, is when a child is doing something she loves, playing a video game or playing outside, and I need her to come in and do a chore or come in and do something for school. We can also use these sorts of transition strategies to help keep that learner on the same page as us. And children are more likely to shift to an activity they don't really love if they have a clear idea that it will end. So we often use a visual marker, and we'll show you some examples of when tasks end, because that can really help reduce their resistance. And any time that you can develop a routine for these things, such as in 2 minutes, we're going to move on to your spelling homework, and then 2 minutes later, you say, okay, let's put that away. It's time for spelling, is a nice way of helping to build that executive function muscle. When we look at sustaining attention, and we'll show you some examples of this a little bit later, we're also trying to give the student or the child some cues about how long we expect them to attend to something. So if a child can work on something by themselves for 4 minutes, but then tends to get really distracted, we'd want to have an adult maybe come in at 3.5 minutes with a clear visual of, hey, you're doing great. You just have a few more minutes. Or as you can see here, using a visual timer where that red zone, that triangle that you see on the picture, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And when the red is gone, this task is done and we're finished. So one of the strategies we often use for kids that have kind of a short attention span is we work out an agreement between home and their teachers that they will do homework every night for a certain number of minutes, let's say 10 minutes or 15. They may not finish all the work they've brought home, but that's okay. We're working on building up the muscle so that they work longer and sustain attention a little bit longer. We also find that providing some frequent breaks and then reinforcing them when they return and attend again can be very useful. It's also quite helpful to make sure that a child has an active part of an activity. It can be very hard for learners with short attention spans to sit and wait. So any way that we can come up with a hands-on activity that is relevant to any information they're listening to, that will often help us. And it's also quite helpful to look around at the environment. If you're trying to focus a child's attention, but there are some really interesting things that they'd rather explore or get involved in, that is just a recipe for pulling their attention away from this maybe less preferred but important thing. So we certainly aren't suggesting that your homes no longer have any art or any texture or anything like that. But it's part of why in a school situation with some learners, being at a study carrel like they have in libraries could be a really effective environment for helping them extend the amount of time they attend on a task because it reduces the kind of pull to the other things in their environment. And as we'll talk a little bit more, some of the environmental modifications we can make have to do with sitting a child towards the front of the classroom or near other children that are attending well and can model that. We also find that we want to make sure that we're not flooding people with information, and auditory alone, so just listening without anything to look at, can be very hard for many learners. So wherever there can be some visual support as they are listening to a new lesson can be useful. And I've used a technique that I got from the literature where, say you wanted a fifth grader to listen and pay attention to a 15-minute mini lecture on a topic, but it's difficult for him to attend to that. You can give that child a list of words to listen to. And when he hears them in the lesson, he can check them off. It gives him a task, it focuses his brain, and he then is more likely to pay attention to the content when he is looking for this specific thing.
Susan, I'm going to interrupt here. So
Yes.
one of the, I love that last suggestion. You told me this suggestion a long time ago, and I actually used it personally with my kids at church because my 17-year-old, like 5 years ago at church, like he was really, really challenged with sitting through, and I'm Catholic. So if anybody out there is Catholic, you know how mundane some of that can be. And so having him tally, he would tally, we would pick a word and he would tally. So if you have to go to a family function, you could maybe count Uncle George's, how many times he says a certain word. So I think you can expand that to meet a lot of different situations.
I'm so glad that you bring that up because I had a parent tell me that they took their son who has an attention issue to a sports banquet for their daughter. So they made him a bingo card that had to do with different things he might hear, throughout the event. And it worked very well. Because one of the other things we know, in addition to focusing them with the task, novelty is a good way to recruit attention. So if a child is going to, whether it's church or a banquet that they're not thrilled about, adding a little something that helps focus them and is novel can be helpful. Cool. And then when we're talking about understanding the big picture versus the details, this is something that we do a lot of times in school as part of learning activities, but something we wanted you to know about. Especially in literacy or learning how to be a writer, we need to explicitly show our learners what the big picture idea is, and then use some visual cues to demonstrate for them how certain details support that bigger picture idea. So if we go to the next slide, you can see that if a person is doing a project about a car, you can use this way of mapping ideas to just demonstrate our primary ideas in the center, and that's the car. And some of the topics that we might write about, maybe one paragraph each, might be safety, might be the process of driving. You get the idea. But you can use these visual techniques so that kids can begin to see, so my main idea is car and my details are over here. So using these kinds of visual things on the fly can really help a student figure out what's the big picture idea and what goes in as a supporting item. And now I'll pass it over to you. Sorry, you're muted.
Thank you. I forgot. Speaking about attention. So these are some strategies that we use in the schools, but I think they have lots of implication for home and community as well. So the 5-point scale and the zones of regulation. And my guess is that many of you probably recognize, especially zones of regulation. It seems like many schools in Littleton have used at least pieces of that one. The 5-point scale, the way that I like to think of the 5-point scale is you can take any emotion or behavior, and you can call it like my anger scale or my attention scale or my impulsivity scale. And you show on, I'm looking at the middle visual here. So then you can show what it looks like, what it feels like, and what you do in that situation. So if it's an impulsivity scale, and we recognize as parents that our child is becoming more and more impulsive, the visual at the left is there because I need to remind myself that if we are going to intervene to support our kids, we need to intervene early on. So the 2 and 3 on the left side match up with the 2 and 3 on the middle visual. And if we wait until the child is so impulsive and so dysregulated, maybe at a 4 or 5, they're going to have a hard time taking our instruction to support them. So we want to make sure that as adults, we're intervening when we start seeing their impulsivity rise, because if we wait too long, then we're going to have to just be quiet, co-regulate with them, help them come back down to a more regulated state to be able to use the skills and strategies that we have determined work best. So the zones of regulation is similar in the fact that you're going to come up with some skills or not skills, strategies and tools that help depending on the zone that the student is in. So we use this in my household to capture kind of an overall feeling or an emotion. So if I tell my husband I'm in the yellow zone, I just need to go to my room for a minute, shut the door. I put on headphones, and I just need I'm often overwhelmed. So I'm not in the red zone. I'm not angry, terrified, out of control, but I'm needing some time to myself to be able to come back to a zone where I can be my best self. And one of the things that happens with this tool as a caution is that sometimes we inadvertently send the message that having these big emotions or these really sad emotions can be a negative. And really, Leah, who designed this, wants to really send the message that there is no bad zone, that it's what we do when we're in that zone that's more important. So how do we, like, we all would love to live our life in the green zone, but that's not reality, especially in the car during rush hour. So what are you going to do to help yourself if you start to notice that you're entering to the yellow zone and you're feeling uncomfortable? Do you need to do some deep breathing? Do you need to put a certain type of music on in the car? Maybe put some hand lotion on with a good smell. So figuring out what those tools and tasks and strategies are for your child at home, and sharing that with the school team can be really powerful, in helping your child feel like they can access their executive function skills, because we're going to access them best in the green zone. And so that's like the optimal zone. And we want to give our kids the best chance to use their most effective skills. So this is a tool that I like to use, and we just use it. A long time ago, I made a PowerPoint presentation and I showed it to my whole family, and now we just use it in generalities. But it really also helps the people around us know what to do and how to act. So if I'm feeling upset because I'm burning dinner in the oven, my kids know that they probably should just stay away. Like, don't come ask me to take them to, I don't know, Chuck E. Cheese or wherever they might want to go. They know that that's not the right time. So another challenge that a lot of our kids with executive function challenges or attentional challenges have that goes along with that is time blindness, and not being able to anticipate the passing of time or look out long over hours or days or weeks, and being able to plan ahead. So what's really important to notice here is that our kids are 3 to 5 years behind what this chart shows. So I think about my 17-year-old. He is definitely not in that 2 to 3 week zone of being able to know what's happening in 2 to 3 weeks. I would say he can do about 4 days, and he gets his work schedule every week, and I help him and try to scaffold and teach him. And I feel like I'm kind of his surrogate frontal lobe right now, in the fact that I'm using the visual tools with him. And I'll show you one of the visual tools that we use to help with the time blindness. But just recognizing that even as an adult, 8 to 12 weeks is what we see as looking forward. But I know that my executive function skills are not great. And so my husband plans all of our vacations, because I would do it like a month in advance, whereas he's doing it 4 to 5 months in advance. So it doesn't go away even when you're an adult, I guess is what my point is. Again, on understanding the passage of time, Sarah Ward is a speech language pathologist who spends a lot of her professional life talking about time blindness and how our kids don't understand the passing of time, and the fact that we see fewer and fewer analog clocks in our environment is not helping our kids. I'm going to go to the next slide because I have a couple more visuals for you here. If you just Google Sarah Ward and passing of time, time management skills, you'll find that she talks about using a working clock. And she will actually draw on analog clocks to help kids see, okay, like at the clock on the left, it says 12:22. And so she'll actually draw on the clock and say, you have 20 minutes to do this assignment or this project, or to clean up your room, whatever the task is, and they can see that passing of time. And that is what she has found and what some research has found to be really important in helping our kids understand and feel that passing of time by being able to watch it while they're working. And I'm going to talk about the thinking time tracker a little bit later. I'm looking at my time. I want to make sure I get to all these slides. So more on time management. If you have maybe 8th graders and up, one of the tools is planning for long-term projects. So here are some ideas on how to do that. Mapping out a weekly schedule and actually shading in the times that they're at school, what their day looks like, how long they may be at practice, and how much time they might have for family time, video games, or homework, so they can start to see what time looks like can be really helpful. And these are hyperlinked, so if you have the handout, you should be able to click on those and have those resources. So we use at our house a monthly calendar on the, like the one on the left. I don't have the fancy Post-it calendar, weekly calendar like that, but we do use these mini Post-its. And I will say, and I think I say this later in one of the slides, that not all sticky notes are made the same. So splurge on the Post-its because they're the stickiest, so they will stay. But we have, each one of us has a color, and then we can move it if we need to. So if I have a dentist appointment, I write it on a sticky note and I put it down, and then if I have to move it, then I can move it to a different day. So I wish I could say I use this with a lot of reliability for myself, but I do a pretty good job with my kids, not so much for myself. And then the resource on the right is helping students with disabilities transition to college. And there are some nice technology tools that they can use to support making the passing of time more visual. So Susan talked a little bit about having a distraction-free space and how visual distraction can be a problem for our kids. And Seth Perler is actually, he used to not be in Colorado. I think he now lives in Boulder. He is a gentleman who went through school. I believe he has ADHD, and he now dedicates his life to supporting older kids, and I think he calls himself maybe an ADHD coach. But he has a couple of different strategies that I love, and one of them is the sacred study space. So setting up a space in your house that is specifically for projects, homework, any space that they would need to be the least distracted possible. So making sure all the tools are there, because what happens is if you have to get up and go find a tool, along the way, you're going to see a magazine that's going to distract you. You're going to look at the magazine. The magazine is about cats, and now you're remembering, oh, my mom told me to feed the cat, so then you're going to go feed the cat. So just making sure that everything is right where it needs to be, and you have all the materials you need, and that everything is just set up perfectly. And if you Google Sacred Study Space and Seth Perler, you will find a lot of his resources and some videos on how he sets that up. And then another one of his great ideas is the backpack overhaul. My kids do this. We try to do it every Sunday night. We didn't do it this last Sunday night because of the basketball games, which, thank you for being here during basketball. I think the basketball game has probably started. So the backpack overhaul we try to do on Sunday nights. We had to do it this morning because we didn't get to it. But the importance of the backpack overhaul, I cannot stress enough, because if your kid's backpack has a bunch of things that they don't need in it, that's what's going to take their attention. And so the things that are really important won't grab their attention, or they will find papers at the bottom that didn't get turned in. So I highly recommend the backpack overhaul. There's a video that you can watch that kind of walks you through exactly how to do it, but it's really not rocket science. You take everything out, you put everything back in, it's organized every week, and it really, if there's no other strategy that you try, this one's a must. Sarah Ward, she talks about a lot of visualization schema strategies. And she has quite a few strategies that are super powerful for things that we can do at home, but also things that can be done at school. And the next slide goes into this a little bit further, but it's essentially asking your kid what they will look like when. And my kids know this so well that I can just start it and they'll finish it. And it's really, what will you look like when you're ready for school? What will you look like when you're ready for church? What will you look like when you're ready for school, soccer? What will you look like when you're ready to go to a birthday party? And it's all those things that you are going to need to go to different places. And it's a lot of those skills. It's attention, it's inhibitory control, because you have to focus and take away all the outside world and think about what you need. There's so many executive functions in just getting out the door. So I am going to let Sarah Ward herself talk to you about this. And let me see if I can play it. And
you give a direction to a child: go upstairs, get your shin guards and your soccer ball, and come downstairs for soccer practice. You're actually the one that's doing the visualizing, right? You're the one picturing the child going up the stairs, into their bedroom, etc. And typically in that circumstance, you're going to have to give the direction 2, 3, 4 times. Go upstairs, don't forget your shin guards. And they may get the shin guards, come back downstairs, and you go, where's the soccer ball? And then they have to go back upstairs. We kind of call that the zigzag behavior. We want to reduce that. So there are several really cool strategies that you can do. One is that we do visualize over space and time, and that's very important to understand. So if you're in the kitchen, you visualize yourself in your bedroom, which is down the hall and up the stairs. If you're at your desk, you visualize yourself turning something in. It might be driving to school and walking in the building. So as a parent, here's a cool tool. Don't give your child the direction and say, go upstairs, brush your teeth, put on your pajamas, and pick out a book. Instead, stop your child at the bottom of the stairs and say, it's time for bed. When you go upstairs, what do you see yourself doing? And you can use a nifty phrase called point out your plan. Now, pointing out your plan is actually really critical, because we want that student to use their hand and gesture. Well, I'm going to go into the bathroom and brush my teeth. I need to go into my bedroom and get my pajamas, and then pick out a book. One thing we know is that gesture really helps us to imagine how we're traveling through space and time. And it's something very specific. It's called representational co-thought gesture. So if you have finished the morning routine with your child and you're down the hall, instead of saying, go get breakfast, and you're thinking about that, stop the child at the end of the hall and say, it's time for breakfast. What's your plan in the kitchen? And you want that child to be able to say, well, I've got to go into the kitchen. I'm going to get Cheerios out of the pantry and milk and make myself a bowl of cereal. Now, if you're having a little bit of an eye roll moment and thinking, okay, I don't think I can get my kid to do that, it's okay, in the sense that what you want to really tell your child is, hey, you're working on organization, you're working on planning skills. And when people plan, they visualize what they're going to do and they imagine where they're going. So we're just practicing that imagination skill, and really tell them why they're doing it. So always have your child point out their plan. So if they've just finished breakfast and it's time to get out the door, say, okay, we're headed out the door. Point out your plan to be ready to go. And
so she has this point out your plan and what does it look like when you're ready. And if you're really interested, I'm going to show another short clip of her describing another strategy, but point out your plan and what does it look like when you're ready for. Those are two really critical skills that we can teach. It's that it's what we do as parents without even thinking about it. I like to talk to staff about the way that I think about it is I have a really hard time of getting out of bed in the morning. And so every single morning I hit the snooze button and I'm already planning through space and time what I'm going to wear. Like I am going through my closet and I'm picking out what I'm going to wear in my mind so that I can have a few more minutes of sleep. And that's what so many of our kids are not able to do. And that's why we're explicitly teaching it. And if you think about the way that we can use our language to talk about it and model it, can be really powerful for kids and husbands.
You give a direction to a child. Go upstairs, get your shin guards and your soccer ball, and come downstairs. For give a direction to a child. Go upstairs, get your shin guards and your soccer. You give a direction to a child.
There we go. Okay, so the other strategy that I want to make sure that we talk about is it has to do with situational intelligence or situational awareness, and it's similar to what Susan was talking about earlier about the big picture versus seeing just a tree in the forest, and really being able to read the room and what that means, and how most of us, even though I have pretty poor executive function skills with a lot of different areas, I am really good at seeing the forest and not just a single tree. So this is a pretty easy one for me, but I find that a lot of kids, including my 17-year-old, have a really hard time making sure that they're looking at the whole environment before making a choice. And I think this goes to his impulsivity because he zeroes in on one little thing and forgets about the rest of the world. And anyway, I'll let her explain it.
Read the room. Another really great example of this, maybe you're cooking dinner and you have the table half set, all right, and there's maybe a few placemats out and tables, and it's clearly water's boiling away on the stove. And this is the child who walks in with the bucket of craft materials and places it on the kitchen and says, "Hey, Mom, can you help me make a diorama?" And you think, well, yes, but not now. Like, read the room. This is not the right timing. And so one of the things is that situational awareness is one of the core underpinnings of executive function, because it's what guides your planning. It's what allows you to say, well, gee, if this is what's happening now, then that accesses that forethought, then this is what I need to look like, or this is what I need to do. So it's one of the bases of self-regulation. So there's a lot of things that you can be doing to actually naturally build situational awareness, but it's a huge underpinning that we have to make sure that kids really do focus on. And so I'm happy to share a few of those strategies, but I wanted to just give you a chance, Jill, to jump in. That's kind of what situational awareness is.
Well, and you know, because these are things that we as adults, we do it all the time. If we're managing in our lives and our work and our kids, we're doing this. And as you said, we're doing it in a blink of an eye. So it's kind of like we never really stop to think, oh, I might need to teach my child some of these skills. And so just you bringing it to our awareness, I think, is really helpful. And I would love for you to share how parents can help their kids get better at reading the room.
You bet. So there's kind of a number. So if we think about it as being space, time, objects, and people, let's start with space. So one of the number one ways is that when we walk into a reading room, we tend to read a room from the wide angle to the narrow angle.
I'm going to stop it there. I'm looking at my time, and I know we have quite a few slides to go. If you don't have the handout, or if you have the handout and your links aren't working, please email me and I will get this to you. But you can go back and watch this. Also on the next
Read
slide.
the room. Another really great example.
Technical difficulties again. On the next slide, it goes into describing what she is meaning by stop and read the room, paying attention to the space and what that means, to the time, to the objects that you see, and to the people and what they're doing, what their mood is. And then to the right of that, there's a hyperlink there, and it takes you to her website. And she has this that you can download for free. And it allows you to look at where does your child excel? What do they pay attention to regarding space, time, objects, and people? And where do you want to focus your attention on helping them improve? So that is there for you if you want to dive deeper in this tool. So she talks a little bit about what does done look like. In a lot of her presentations, she puts on really funky glasses, and she'll say, especially when she's talking to educators, and she's saying, you know, if you're a first grade teacher, if you're a ninth grade teacher, put on glasses and talk about whatever your content is and talk about what the future project is, or the action, like what does it look like when you're lining up for recess, whatever the behavior or the activity is. So anytime that, especially if you have younger kids or goofy high schoolers, you could put on your silly glasses and say, oh boy, this is not what I expected done to look like when I asked you to clean your room, or this is not what I expect done to look like when you finish laundry or cleaning the bathroom or whatever. So it's kind of a fun way to help them think about the future and what done looks like. Again, you can take a picture of what done or being ready looks like. So when my kids were younger, I would take a picture after I had cleaned their room of what their room looks like, or what their bathroom looks like, or what their backpack should look like, or what the sacred study space should look like when they leave it. So taking a photo and then using the markup tool, if you have an iPhone, to point out different things so that you don't have to take a picture of every single thing. So you might take a picture of what it looks like for them to go to soccer, and you don't need to take a picture then of what it looks like for basketball or church or any of the other places, but you're going to talk about same but different. So maybe their hair for soccer is going to be in a ponytail versus their hair to go to church is going to be curled and down. So you can talk about same but different. You're going to focus on each part of the person and what they look like, maybe the objects they have with them, but they're going to be different depending on where they're going. And then Sarah Ward again, has this tool called Get Ready, Do Done. I'm going to go to the next slide. I'm going to give an example here. So you start with the end as the parent to fill this in. So you're going to start with, what does done look like? So in this case, done is a turned in, completed work that's done on the iPad. So maybe you have a screenshot of that, or maybe you just write it down. And then, okay, what do you need to do to get it complete? You would watch the video, do the practice problems, and then pick 2 from the choice menu. Okay, now what materials do you need to be able to do that? So you're going to work from done to do to get ready, and then your child will be able to do this more independently. They'll know what they need to get, they'll know what to do, and they will know when they're done. Sorry, I'm going over very quickly. Here's another example of what it could look like in your sacred study space. The cue is simply, you can go to, that's Seth Perler, by the way. It's using a cue folder, but you're putting the materials in the folder, and you're using a sticky note. So when they go to the school the next day, they know, turn this into whoever it is. So they don't even have to open up the folder. They can just look in their backpack that's nice and tidy thanks to the backpack overhaul, and they just pull that out. Maybe it's something that's signed for a to go on a field trip or something. They pull it out and they don't even have to look at it. It's already marked for them. Let's see. Okay, so the rest of this is talking about technology, and technology can be amazing, but technology alone is not going to fix executive function. It's an accommodation to support where we have challenges, and it's the reality of our world now. So use the technology, but know that you're going to have to teach it. I'm just going to go through these slides quickly so you know what's in here. Here's some note-taking options for you. I tried to stick mostly to Chromebook options because I know that's what our students are mostly using. I will point out that this Text Help Study Skills that is an add-on in Google Docs is really critical for, I would say, probably 4th grade and up, to be able to mark up things that they're learning, and even talk about, they can block out things that don't matter. So that blackout concept to find main ideas, and some more resources for you. Some things that are free on an iPad or an iPhone, some other resources for executive function supports, including emotion. And then this is probably, if you look at any of the technology slides, this is probably the best one. These are Google extensions. And if you end up getting more than a couple, I highly recommend Extensity because it allows you to easily organize the tools that you do have and turn them on and off. I put this slide in here just last minute. It's actually the tomato timer. If you click on it, it's the, I don't even know how to say it. Pomodoro, is that how you say it, Susan? And it is so simple that it works. It's 25 minutes of focus, a few minutes of break, 25 minutes of focus. It's how I get all my paperwork done. So, and I recommend it to everybody that is in high school or college. And here are some useful websites that we touched on throughout the presentation, and all of the work cited. And whew, I rushed through that last few slides very quickly, and I apologize. But if you have questions, please let me know. Thank you for coming. Susan and I both love talking about all of this, and we would love to answer any questions.
That was excellent, Michelle. I really love your technology tools. And every time that I talk with you about this, you found some new ones. So that's really super. So a couple things in the chat. Natalie is asking, could you share your email address in the chat so she can request the slides? Is that where they get them, or is there another place?
Lucy did send them out in the email, but let's see. I will share my email here, but also I will make sure that Lucy has access to the slides as well as the recording. So if you would like to watch the recording over again, you can get that.
Great. That is super. Thank you. And then Cass asked a question early on. I'm curious about kids in a classroom who use fidgets and the balance between the distraction of the fidget and the reduction of the distraction. It seems that they often begin as a help for attention and then become the distractor. Cass, that's such a good point. We are often trying to balance that very thing where we don't want the learner to become distracted by the fidget, nor do we want the kids around that learner to become distracted by the fidget. So oftentimes, I don't have a terrific solution that'll work 100% of the time. But one of the approaches I might think about, and Michelle, please add on, is at the start of introducing something new, we always want to think about right time, right place. So perhaps a fidget is made available when young child needs to be in circle time, but that fidget then gets put back in a box that is like a finish box. It's part of the routine. When we leave circle, we put it back and then we move on to the next thing. So we clearly have some routines around when to access the fidget and when you're done with the fidget. When you first introduce it, it may initially look distracting. One of the things that I've just been fascinated by is that many of the children I work with can look like they are not paying attention because they're manipulating a fidget spinner or something. But afterwards, when I ask them a few questions, they can tell me what it was that was going on around them. So for some learners on the outside, they look inattentive, they look distractible. And with a couple of knowledge checks, you might find that they are actually getting the big ideas. If, however, it's not going in that direction and the fidget is too stimulating, then what I often try to think about is we're going to make that fidget part of our reward kit. When the child has done something really well and has a break, that fidget goes there. I need something less interesting, but a little interesting that I'm going to introduce it to stay in the activity. So it's a lot of brainstorming. And sometimes we have to think about, is this the right place or time for a fidget? Do we need a different way of focusing them? And then secondly, is it the right fidget? Because if it's too stimulating, that can absolutely get in the way. And then we want to think about too, if it's creating noise or lights that's taking attention away from the other learners, we'll want to come up with something different. If there's if you have a student who has a difficult time staying for the entire time of a group activity, another strategy that we'll often use is on the fly indicating what our expectation is for them, how long we want them to stay here. So for example, I'll often use a Post-it note or a dry erase board and draw like an empty circle, with the idea being that the student and I have agreed that I'm going to, as I'm walking through and checking on everybody's work, I'm going to color in that circle. When the student's circle is all the way colored in, he's done with that activity. He can go to the back of the classroom where independent work is and go ahead and be fidgety. That way, we have a shared understanding that a completely colored in circle means you're all done. But I, as the teacher, get to decide just how quickly I'm going to color in that circle. So if he's doing a good job of attending, I can color more slowly and keep him with the group longer. If he's having a fidgety time of day or a difficult day, I might be catching him attending, doing a good job, and color in more quickly so that he leaves on a good note and it doesn't just end up being an inattentive moment. So all that to say, we want to problem solve those distractors, and sometimes fidgets aren't the right way to go. And instead we want to decrease our expectation for how long to stay and then go into the back of the room and maybe do a learning activity independently that hopefully is also along with the content. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Michelle?
Oh my gosh, those were great ideas. I think the only three things I would add. Talking about the fidget as a tool and not a toy. So when it becomes a toy and then secondly, having those clear expectations like Susan mentioned, and having those expectations written down visually so that you can reference those as a way to monitor and figure out what the next step would be, whether it's put it away, choose a different one, or maybe take a break. And that brings me to my third questioning, and that would be finding out the deeper why. Like, why is the student playing with it? Do they need a break away from the classroom? Are they overwhelmed? Is there a sensory need that's not being met with the fidget? So just looking at the deeper why.
Oh, that's very good. That's very good.
Real quick, I am going to stop the recording, and then I also gave everybody the opportunity to unmute. So if you want to ask a question verbally instead of putting it into the chat, you could do that too. So
that's super. Thank you. While you're doing that, Nicholas has given us a comment that he's struggling with the lack of homework, that he doesn't see any for his LPS fourth grader.